Hello and thank you for joining for tonight's stories. I hope you enjoy. The Thing in the Woods. The listing appeared on a Tuesday. Jake Morrison had been scrolling through rental sites for 3 weeks, searching for anything, that wouldn't require him to sell a kidney to afford a weekend getaway. The group chat had been buzzing with increasingly desperate messages. Lisa wanted rustic charm. Mateo demanded Wi-Fi and hot water. Rachel, who had grown up near the Navajo Nation in Arizona, simply wanted somewhere that doesn't feel like a serial killer's basement. Then Jake found it, Whispering Pines Cabin, deep in the Navajo Nation territory, surrounded by old-growth forest, available for $200 for the entire weekend. The photos were grainy, taken in what looked like perpetual twilight, showing a weathered wooden structure hunched among towering pines like a creature trying to hide. There were no reviews, no ratings, just a phone number and an address that Jake's GPS could barely locate. "This is it," Jake typed into the group chat, already feeling the victory of finding something they could actually afford. "Whispering Pines, looks legit." Lisa responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Mateo sent a skeptical "no reviews, sketchy." But Rachel's message made Jake pause. "Where exactly?" Jake sent the coordinates. 3 dots appeared indicating Rachel was typing. Then they disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "That's near Chuska Mountain. My grandmother used to say, 'Never mind, it's fine, let's just be careful.'" Jake laughed it off. Rachel was always superstitious, always talking about her grandmother's stories, the old ways, the things you shouldn't speak aloud. It was part of her charm, really, even if it sometimes made the rest of them roll their eyes. They planned to leave Friday afternoon, carpooling in 2 vehicles. Jake would drive with Lisa and Derek. Mateo would take Rachel and his girlfriend, Sarah. 6 friends, 3 days, 1 cheap cabin in the woods. What could go wrong? Friday arrived with a sky the color of old bruises, heavy clouds pressing down on the city like a hand. Jake loaded his Subaru with coolers of beer, bags of chips, and enough hiking gear to satisfy Lisa's outdoorsy requirements. Derek showed up with a guitar and a bag of weed, because of course he did. Derek never went anywhere without his guitar. "Road trip," Derek shouted, climbing into the back seat with his instrument case. "I call shotgun for music control." "You're in the back," Jake said, starting the engine. "Lisa called shotgun yesterday." "Traitor," Derek muttered, but he was smiling. They pulled out of Jake's apartment complex at 2 p.m., the GPS already calculating a 4-hour drive into the heart of Navajo territory. The city gave way to suburbs, then to desert, then to something older, red rock formations that looked like the bones of giants, mesas that had watched civilizations rise and fall, silence that felt almost deliberate. 2 hours in, they stopped at a roadside diner called the Fry Bread Hut, a weathered building with a neon sign that buzzed like an angry insect. The parking lot held 3 trucks and a motorcycle. Inside, the air smelled of grease and coffee and something sweet. Fry bread, Jake assumed, though he'd never actually eaten it. They took a booth by the window, ordering burgers and fries that arrived in portions large enough to feed a family. The waitress was Navajo, middle-aged, with kind eyes that didn't quite meet theirs. She refilled their coffees without being asked and disappeared into the kitchen. That's when Jake noticed the woman. She sat alone in the corner booth, so still she might have been part of the furniture. Elderly, her face a map of wrinkles that spoke of decades in the desert sun, her hair white and braided with turquoise beads. She wore a denim jacket over a calico dress, and her hands, knotted with arthritis, clutched a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She was staring at them. Not just looking, staring. Her dark eyes fixed on their table with an intensity that made the hair on Jake's neck stand up. She didn't blink, didn't move, just watched. Guys," Jake whispered, nodding toward the corner. "Creepy staring lady at 3 o'clock. Lisa turned, then quickly looked back at her plate. "Maybe she's just lonely." "Maybe she's a serial killer," Derek suggested, grinning. Maybe this is how horror movies start. Shut up, Lisa said, but she was smiling. Jake raised his hand in a small wave, trying to be friendly, trying to break whatever spell had settled over the old woman. Hi, he mouthed. The woman didn't respond. She just kept staring. Then slowly, deliberately, she turned her head away, looking out the window at their Subaru parked in the lot. Her lips moved, though no sound reached their table. She was speaking to herself, or perhaps to someone only she could see. Okay, that was weird, Jake said, turning back to his food. His appetite had vanished. They finished eating in relative silence, the old woman's presence pressing against them like a weight. When they stood to leave, Jake glanced back at her corner booth. She was gone. Her tea still sat on the table, steam still rising from it. The cup was full, as if she hadn't taken a single sip. But the woman herself had vanished. No sign of her in the parking lot, no sign of her on the road stretching in either direction. Just gone. Guess we scared her off, Derek joked, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. They got back in the car and drove, the diner shrinking in the rearview mirror until it was swallowed by the horizon. The landscape grew wilder, the road narrower, the cell signal spottier. By hour 3, they hadn't passed another vehicle in 20 minutes. This is actually kind of nice, Lisa said, staring out at the passing pines. No traffic, no noise, just peace. Peace, Derek repeated, strumming a minor chord on his guitar. Until the chainsaw massacre starts. Derek. What? I'm just saying. Cheap cabin, no reviews, creepy diner lady. This has all the hallmarks of. Shut up, Jake and Lisa said in unison. They drove for another hour, following GPS coordinates that seemed increasingly unreliable. The road turned to gravel, then to dirt, then to something that was barely a path at all, 2 ruts carved through the forest floor, overgrown with grass and pine needles. Branches scraped against the sides of the Subaru, and Jake found himself gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. Are you sure this is right? Lisa asked, checking her phone. I lost signal 10 minutes ago. The GPS says we're close. The GPS also thinks we're driving through a lake right now. Jake looked at the screen. Sure enough, the blue route line cut straight through a patch of blue that clearly represented water. Okay, so technology is failing us, but the coordinates are. The cabin appeared. It materialized from the trees like a secret, hunched in a clearing that shouldn't have existed. The pines simply stopped, as if they'd agreed to give the structure space. The building was exactly like the photos. Weathered wood, sagging porch, windows that reflected the dying light like blind eyes. Behind it, the forest rose in a wall of darkness, impenetrable and still. Too still. Jake stopped the car, engine idling, and felt the wrongness settle over him like a blanket. There was no bird song, no insect hum, no wind moving through the branches, just silence, absolute and complete, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Okay, Lisa whispered, this is atmospheric. It's dead, Jake said, and immediately wished he hadn't. They got out of the car, doors slamming with sounds that seemed almost offensive in the quiet. The air smelled of pine and something else, something metallic, like old pennies or dried blood. Jake told himself it was just the forest, just the way things smelled out here, away from the city's pollution. Mateo's truck appeared 10 minutes later, bouncing down the overgrown path with considerably less care than Jake had shown. Mateo parked beside the Subaru, and the others piled out, Rachel first, her dark eyes scanning the tree line with an expression Jake couldn't read. You made it, Mateo said, stretching. Thought you guys might have died. Almost, Derek said. Jake's driving is terrifying. Hey. But Rachel wasn't listening. She had walked to the edge of the clearing, her head tilted back, her nostrils flaring as if scenting the air. When she turned back to them, her face had gone pale beneath her tan. We shouldn't stay here, she said. What? Lisa laughed. Rachel, come on, we just got here. Listen, Rachel held up her hand. Do you hear that? They listened, silence, perfect, absolute silence. I don't hear anything, Mateo said. That's the point, it's peaceful. No, Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper. It's wrong, forests aren't silent. There should be birds, insects, something. This is dead space. Probably pesticides, Mateo said, ever the skeptic. Or maybe it's just the time of day. Animals sleep too, you know. Rachel shook her head, but she didn't argue. Jake watched her hands tremble as she retrieved her bag from Mateo's truck, watched her hesitate at the cabin door before finally pushing it open. The interior was surprisingly clean. Dusty, yes, and smelling of cedar and mothballs, but someone had prepared it for guests. There were 6 beds in 2 rooms, 3 bunk beds in each, plus a small kitchen with a propane stove and a wood-burning fireplace. The windows were covered with heavy curtains that blocked out the forest entirely. See, Jake said, trying to inject cheer into his voice. It's perfect. Rachel didn't answer. She was staring at the fireplace, at the ashes in the grate that looked disturbingly fresh. They settled in, unpacking bags and claiming beds. Derek and Mateo immediately started a fire in the pit outside, using wood from a stack that had been left beside the cabin. Lisa explored the perimeter, taking photos with her phone. Sarah and Rachel stayed inside, Sarah chattering about work drama while Rachel sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the window. By sunset, they had a fire roaring and beers in hand. The darkness pressed against the clearing like a physical force, but the firelight held it back, creating a bubble of warmth and safety. They told stories, laughed, passed the guitar around so Derek could play his repertoire of campfire songs. Jake felt himself relaxing. This was what they'd needed, time away from the city, from jobs and responsibilities, from the constant noise of modern life. The silence of the forest was strange, yes, but it was also soothing, like a blanket wrapped tight. So, Mateo said, leaning back in his camp chair, ghost stories. Oh, come on, Lisa groaned. We're not 12. I know a good one, Rachel said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Rachel never told ghost stories. She was the one who changed the subject when conversations turned to the supernatural, the one who left the room during horror movie nights. My grandmother used to tell me about the Ye Naldlusha, Rachel said, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. The Skinwalkers. Skinwalkers, Sarah repeated, like the Reddit thing. Not Reddit, Navajo. Rachel's eyes reflected the flames, making them seem to glow. They're witches, evil ones, people who have committed the worst possible sin, killing a family member to gain power. Power to do what? Derek asked, leaning forward. Change shape. Rachel's hands moved in the air, sketching forms. They wear the skins of animals, wolves, coyotes, bears, and they become those animals. But they can also become people. They can wear your face, speak with your voice, know your memories. Bullshit, Mateo said, but his voice lacked conviction. They're fast, Rachel continued, ignoring him. Faster than any natural creature. They can mimic sounds perfectly, voices, animals, anything. They use it to lure you away from safety, and they collect things, teeth, hair, pieces of the people they kill. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the dark sky. No one spoke. My grandmother said you should never speak their name aloud, Rachel said. Never tell their stories after dark, because they can hear you. They can hear their name and they come to see who called. Rachel, Lisa said gently, you're freaking us out. Good, Rachel stood, her chair scraping against the dirt. You should be freaked out. This place, she gestured at the darkness beyond the firelight. This is their territory. My grandmother warned me about the Chuska Mountains. She said the Skinwalkers live in the high places, in the forests where the trees grow too close together. It's just a story, Mateo said. Local folklore every culture has. A twig snapped. The sound came from the tree line, sharp and clear like a bone breaking. Everyone froze, heads turning toward the darkness. "Probably a deer," Jake said, but his voice came out as a whisper. Another snap, closer this time. Then another and another, a rhythmic progression, as if something was walking toward them through the underbrush. "Hello," Derek called out. "If that's a bear, we're not worth the trouble. Go away." The footsteps stopped. Silence returned, deeper than before, as if the forest was waiting. Jake felt his heart hammering against his ribs, felt the beer in his hand suddenly seem ridiculous. He set it down, slowly, quietly. Then the voice came. "Hey," it was Jake's voice. Exactly Jake's voice, down to the slight rasp from his morning coffee. "Come here." Jake's blood turned to ice. He was sitting right there, right in front of everyone, and yet his voice was coming from the trees. "What the fuck?" Mateo breathed. "Hey," the voice again, but now from a different direction, off to the left, deeper in the forest. "Come here, I found something." 3 directions at once. The voice surrounded them, Jake's voice calling them into the dark. "It's a recording," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "Someone's playing a recording." "Of my voice?" Jake asked. "How would someone have a recording of my voice?" "Hey," now from behind the cabin, so close Jake could hear the footsteps again, heavy and deliberate. "Come here, it's important." Rachel stood, her body rigid. "Inside," she commanded. "Now." They moved as one, grabbing bags and chairs and the guitar, stumbling toward the cabin door. Jake was last, his eyes fixed on the tree line, trying to see what was making his voice, what was wearing his face in the darkness. He saw nothing, just shadows that seemed to move independently of the wind. They slammed the door, locked it, and Rachel immediately began pulling the curtains closed, every window, every crack of glass that might let the thing see in. "What was that?" Sarah was crying, clutching Mateo's arm. "What was that?" "Skinwalker," Rachel said. "It heard me. I shouldn't have spoken. I shouldn't have." "Stop," Mateo commanded. "It's not a skinwalker. It's someone messing with us. A local who doesn't like tourists, something like that." "Then why was it using Jake's voice?" Lisa asked. No one had an answer. They sat in the cabin's main room, lights blazing, no one willing to sleep. Derek tried to play the guitar to lighten the mood, but the strings sounded wrong, flat and dead, as if the instrument itself was afraid. Hours passed. The silence outside remained absolute. No more voices, no more footsteps, just the weight of the forest pressing against the walls. "I need to pee," Derek announced around midnight. "Use the bucket in the corner," Rachel said. "I'm not peeing in a bucket. There's an outhouse. I'll be 30 seconds. "Derek, don't." But he was already moving, unlocking the door, slipping out into the night before anyone could stop him. The door clicked shut behind him. "Should we go after him?" Sarah asked. "He'll be fine," Mateo said. "He's right, it's just an outhouse. 30 seconds. They counted 30 seconds, 60, 90. "Derek," Jake called through the door. No answer. Jake unlocked the door, stepped onto the porch. The outhouse was visible from the cabin, a small wooden structure about 50 feet away, door closed, no light showing from within. "Derek," Jake shouted, "stop messing around." Silence. Jake grabbed a flashlight from the porch and started walking, his heart pounding with every step. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating pine needles and fallen branches and nothing else. No Derek, no sign of him at all. He reached the outhouse, knocked on the door. "Derek, this isn't funny." The door swung open, unlocked, empty. The smell hit Jake immediately, not just waste but something else, something coppery and wrong. On the seat, placed carefully in the center, was Derek's shoe. His left hiking boot, laces neatly tied, positioned as if waiting for a foot that would never return. Jake ran. He ran back to the cabin, screaming Derek's name, and the others poured out onto the porch, flashlights sweeping the clearing. "Derek," Lisa's voice cracked. "Derek, where are you?" The answer came from the trees. Derek's voice, but wrong somehow, glitching between his familiar tone and something deeper, something that sounded like rocks grinding together. "I'm here," the voice stuttered, fragmented. "Come, find me." "That's not Derek," Rachel whispered. "That's not Derek." They spent the next hour searching, calling, shining lights into the forest that revealed nothing but more trees. The voice continued, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always using Derek's words but wrong, so wrong like a broken recording played through a mouth that wasn't human. Finally, they retreated to the cabin. There was nothing else to do. Derek was gone, taken by something that could mimic his voice perfectly, something that had left his shoe as a message. They barricaded the door, pushed furniture against the windows, and sat in the dark, waiting for dawn. It never came. Or rather, it came, but wrong, the sky lightening to a bruised purple that never quite became day. The sun seemed trapped behind the mountains, unable to fully rise, and the forest remained in perpetual twilight. "We need to find Derek," Jake said, his voice hoarse from shouting. "We need to search the woods." "We can't," Rachel said. "Not in this light, not with it out there." "So we just leave him." "We leave," Rachel said. "We get to the cars and we drive until we're in another state. Then we call the police." "The police won't." "They won't find him," Rachel interrupted. "No one finds them, that's the point. The Skinwalkers take you and you become part of them, your voice, your face, your memories. Derek is gone, Jake. I'm sorry, but he's gone." Jake wanted to argue, wanted to rage, but he knew she was right. He'd heard the thing wearing Derek's voice. He'd seen how perfect the mimicry was, how easily it could become anyone. They gathered their things, moving in silence, no one willing to speak above a whisper. The cabin felt different in the false dawn, smaller, somehow, as if the walls were closing in. The air smelled of rot and cedar, and Jake noticed for the first time that the dust on the floor wasn't just dust. It was ash, white ash, scattered in patterns that might have been deliberate. "Protection," Rachel said, noticing his gaze. "Someone tried to ward this place. It didn't work." They left the cabin in a tight group, Jake in front with the biggest flashlight, Mateo in back with the hunting knife he'd brought for emergencies. The cars sat where they'd left them, untouched, seemingly undisturbed. They were halfway across the clearing when Lisa stopped. "Wait," she said. "Listen." They listened, and from the cabin behind them they heard Derek's voice, clear and perfect and utterly wrong. "Guys," it called, "why did you leave me? I'm hurt. Please come back." Jake turned. Through the cabin window he saw a figure, Derek's shape, Derek's clothes, Derek's face pressed against the glass. But the face was wrong, stretched too wide, the mouth opening and closing in sync with the voice, but the words coming from everywhere at once. "It's learning," Rachel breathed. "It's learning how to be him." They ran. They ran to the cars, fumbling with keys, and Jake's Subaru started on the first try. Thank God, thank God. He peeled out, tires spitting gravel and pine needles, and in the rearview mirror he saw the thing that wore Derek's face standing at the tree line. It wasn't running after them. It wasn't chasing. It was waving goodbye. And its jaw was unhinging, impossibly wide, not to roar but to laugh, a sound that followed them for miles, echoing through the forest long after they should have been out of earshot. They drove in silence, no one willing to speak, no one willing to acknowledge what they'd seen. Rachel sat in the back seat, rocking slightly, whispering something in Navajo under her breath. Protection, Jake assumed, or perhaps just prayer. They reached the highway after 2 hours of driving, the sun finally breaking through the clouds in a way that felt almost normal. They stopped at the first gas station they found, a fluorescent-lit island of civilization, and Jake called 911. The police came. They took statements, searched the area, found the cabin exactly where Jake said it would be. But when they entered, it was empty, no Derek, no signs of struggle, no ash on the floor. Just an abandoned cabin in the woods, dusty and forgotten. They searched for 3 days. Helicopters, dogs, volunteers. Nothing. Derek had vanished as completely as if he'd never existed. The case was closed in 48 hours. Missing person, presumed dead, probably wandered into the woods and got lost. It happened sometimes, the sheriff said. City folks didn't understand how dangerous the wilderness could be. But before they left, a Navajo officer pulled Rachel aside. Jake watched from a distance, saw the man's face go grave as Rachel spoke, saw him nod slowly. "You didn't see anything," the officer said, loud enough for Jake to hear. "And if you did, don't say its name, don't speak of it again. The more you talk about them, the stronger they become." They drove home in separate cars, no longer speaking, the friendship that had bound them shattered by fear and guilt. Jake moved to a different apartment, changed his phone number, tried to forget. But some things can't be forgotten. 3 months later, Jake's phone rang at 3 a.m. The screen showed Derek's number disconnected. Impossible, but there it was. Jake answered. Static, loud and harsh, filled his ear. Then, through the noise, a voice. "I'm outside." The call ended. Jake sat frozen in his bed, staring at the phone, telling himself it was a dream, a hallucination, a prank. Then he heard the twigs snap in his backyard. And Derek's voice, perfect and clear, whispered through the window. "Come here, Jake, I found something." Jake didn't move. He sat frozen in his bed, the phone still clutched in his hand, every muscle locked in terror. The voice had been Derek's, perfect, absolute, unmistakable. But Derek was gone. Derek had been taken by something in the woods, something that wore faces and collected voices like trophies. "I'm outside." The words echoed in Jake's mind, looping endlessly. Outside. Derek was outside. Or rather, the thing that wore Derek was outside, standing in Jake's suburban backyard, mimicking his dead friend's voice with inhuman precision. Another sound reached him, twigs snapping, the soft crunch of footsteps on grass. Then the whisper again, closer now, pressed against the window glass. "Come here, Jake, I found something." Jake's paralysis broke. He scrambled out of bed, grabbing the baseball bat he kept in the corner for home defense, and backed toward the bedroom door. His eyes never left the window, waiting for a face to appear, for Derek's features to press against the glass with that stretched, wrong smile. Nothing, just darkness. He made it to the hallway, heart hammering, and that's when he heard the back door handle rattle. Once, twice, testing, probing, then silence. Jake ran to the front door, unlocked it with shaking hands, and sprinted to his car in socks and boxers. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel it watching from the house, feel its attention like a physical weight pressing against his spine. He drove until dawn, ending up at a Denny's 50 miles away, where he sat in a corner booth and stared at his phone until the battery died. When he finally worked up the courage to go home, the back door was standing open, the lock broken from the outside. Nothing was missing. Nothing was disturbed. But on his kitchen table, placed carefully in the center, was a single tooth. Human molar, blood still fresh on the root. Jake moved that week. He found a new apartment in a different city, changed his number again, deleted his social media. He told himself he was being paranoid, that the stress of Derek's disappearance had caused a breakdown, that the phone call had been a hallucination or a prank. But he couldn't explain the tooth. He tried to contact the others. Lisa had blocked his number. Mateo and Sarah had moved to another state, leaving no forwarding address. Only Rachel responded, and her message was brief. "Don't call me again, it's listening." 6 months passed. Jake found a job, made new friends who didn't know about the cabin or the woods or the thing that wore Derek's face. He started therapy, took medication for anxiety, learned to sleep through the night without waking at every sound. Then the dreams began. They always started the same way. Jake standing in the clearing at Whispering Pines, the cabin behind him, the forest silent and waiting. He would turn in a slow circle, searching for the others, and find them one by one. Lisa hanging from a tree by her own intestines. Mateo and Sarah fused together in a mass of limbs and screaming mouths. Rachel kneeling before the fire with her face peeled off and held in her own hands. And Derek, always Derek, standing at the tree line, smiling with too many teeth. "Come here, Jake," Dream Derek would say. "I found something." Jake would wake screaming, sheets soaked with sweat, the smell of pine and ash clinging to his skin. The dreams grew worse. Soon he couldn't tell when he was awake and when he was sleeping. He would see Derek on the street in crowds standing at the edge of his vision, always smiling, always waiting. He started keeping a journal documenting everything, the dreams, the sightings, the feeling of being watched. He researched skinwalkers obsessively, reading every academic paper, every folklore collection, every first-hand account he could find. He learned about the witchery way, the corruption of Hajo, the price of power. He learned that skinwalkers weren't born but made, humans who had committed the ultimate taboo, who had murdered family to gain the ability to wear other faces. He learned that they could be killed, but only if you discovered their true name, their human identity. Only if you could force them back into their original form and pierce their heart with a weapon tipped with white ash. He learned that they hated their reflections, that mirrors could trap them, that they feared the touch of white ash more than anything. He learned too much. The thing that wore Derek's face started leaving gifts. A lock of Lisa's hair, tied with a ribbon. Mateo's wedding ring, still on the severed finger. Rachel's turquoise necklace, stained with something that looked like blood but smelled like rot. Each gift appeared in Jake's apartment while he slept, placed carefully where he would find them. Each came with a note in Derek's handwriting. "I miss you, come find me." Jake stopped sleeping. He started using amphetamines to stay awake, anything to avoid the dreams, the visits, the slow erosion of his sanity. He lost his job, lost his apartment, ended up in a motel on the edge of town, paying cash and keeping the lights on 24/7. That's where Rachel found him. She appeared in his doorway one morning, gaunt and hollow-eyed, her hair hacked short with what looked like a knife. She carried a duffel bag that clinked with the sound of glass and metal. "We need to end this," she said. Jake stared at her, too exhausted to be surprised. "How did you find me?" "It led me here." Rachel stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "It's been showing me things, your face, your location. It wants us together. Easier to hunt that way." "Then why are you here?" "Because I'm tired of running." Rachel unzipped the duffel bag, revealing an arsenal of weapons, knives, hatchets, a compound bow, and jars of white ash. "My grandmother taught me things, protection rituals, ways to hurt them. I've been preparing." "Preparing for what?" "To kill it." Rachel's eyes met his, and Jake saw something there that hadn't been there before, a hardness, a resignation. "Derek is dead, Jake. What's wearing his face is something else, something that needs to be destroyed." "How?" We go back. We go back to Whispering Pines and we force it to show its true form. Then we kill it." Jake laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "Go back? Are you insane? That's exactly what it wants." "Yes," Rachel's voice was calm. "It wants us to come. It thinks we're prey, but we have something it doesn't expect." "What?" Rachel reached into the bag and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "Knowledge. I've been researching just like you, but I found something you didn't. A way to trap it. A way to force it back into its human form." She opened the journal to a page marked with a red ribbon. The text was handwritten in Navajo, with English translations in the margins. "The Skinwalkers were once human," Rachel read. "They made a choice, committed a sin to gain power. But that power has a weakness. If you can remind them of their humanity, their true name, their true face, their original sin, you can force them back. The transformation breaks. They become human again just for a moment, long enough to kill them. And you know its true name. Rachel's expression darkened. I know who it was. My grandmother knew. She told me stories about a man from our community, a healer who went bad. He killed his brother to gain power, became a skinwalker, started hunting in the Chuska Mountains. That was 50 years ago. He's still there, still wearing faces. How do we find out which face he's wearing now? We already know. Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper. He's wearing Derek, has been since that night, but Derek wasn't his first. He's worn hundreds of faces over 50 years. We need to find his original face, his human face, the face he had before he became this. And how do we do that? Rachel closed the journal. We ask the dead. They left that night, driving Rachel's truck into the desert, following roads that grew progressively smaller and more overgrown. Jake sat in the passenger seat, clutching a jar of white ash, watching the landscape transform from city to suburb to desert to something older, red rock and twisted trees and silence that felt almost aggressive. Where are we going? Jake asked. My grandmother's land. She left it to me when she died. It's protected, or it was. I don't know if the protections still hold. They drove for hours, the stars wheeling overhead in patterns that seemed wrong, too fast, as if time itself was moving differently here. Finally, Rachel turned onto a dirt track that wound through a canyon, the walls rising on either side like the jaws of some great beast. The Hogan sat in a clearing, traditional and round, made of logs and earth. Smoke rose from a central vent, and Jake smelled something sweet and sharp, sage, he thought, or cedar. Someone's here, he said. No one should be here. Rachel stopped the truck, her hand moving to the knife at her belt. Stay close. They approached the Hogan together, weapons ready. The door was covered with a blanket that had been painted with symbols Jake didn't recognize, protective signs, he assumed, or perhaps warnings. Rachel pulled the blanket aside. Inside, the Hogan was empty except for a fire pit in the center, where embers still glowed red. Arranged around the fire were objects Jake recognized. Derek's guitar, Lisa's camera, Mateo's hunting knife, Sarah's wedding ring. And in the center, placed carefully on a bed of white feathers, was a mask. Human skin, stretched and dried with holes for eyes and mouth. The face was unfamiliar, middle-aged, Navajo features, a scar running from temple to jaw. His first face, Rachel breathed. The face he had before he became a skinwalker. Someone left this for us. Who? I don't. The voice came from behind them, from the darkness outside the Hogan. A woman's voice, old and cracked, speaking Navajo. Rachel spun, knife raised. Grandmother. The old woman from the diner stepped into the firelight. She looked exactly as Jake remembered, white braids, denim jacket, eyes that didn't quite focus on the physical world. But now Jake could see what he had missed before. She wasn't entirely solid. Light passed through her in places, and her feet didn't quite touch the ground. You speak too much, granddaughter, the spirit said. You draw it with your words. I'm sorry, Rachel whispered. I didn't know, I thought. You thought you could fight it. The spirit moved closer to the fire, her form flickering. You cannot fight what you do not understand. This one, she gestured at the mask. He was called Ashkiai. He was my cousin. He killed his brother for power, and he has been killing ever since. He wears your friend's face now. He wears it well. How do we stop him? Jake asked. The spirit turned to look at him, and Jake felt the weight of her gaze like a physical force. You must remind him of what he was. Speak his name. Show him his face. Force him to remember his sin. In that moment of memory, he will be vulnerable. Strike then with ash and iron. And then he will die. The spirit's form began to fade, growing transparent. But be warned. He has worn many faces. He has collected many voices. He is old and cunning. He will not come to you. You must go to him. You must enter his territory and force the confrontation. Whispering Pines, Rachel said. Yes. The spirit was barely visible now, just a shimmer in the air. But know this, grandchildren, if you fail, he will wear your faces next. He will add your voices to his collection, and you will wander the woods forever, calling others to their doom. She vanished. The fire went out, plunging them into darkness. They waited until dawn, huddled together in the hogan, neither willing to sleep. When the sun finally rose, painting the canyon walls in shades of blood and gold, they gathered their weapons and the mask and set out for Whispering Pines. The drive took all day. They stopped only for gas and water, eating protein bars and speaking in monosyllables. Both knew what waited for them at the cabin. Both knew the odds of survival were slim. But they were tired of running, tired of being hunted. It was time to hunt in return. They reached the turnoff to Whispering Pines as the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that seemed almost violent. The dirt road was even more overgrown than Jake remembered, barely passable, but Rachel's truck handled it with grim determination. The clearing appeared suddenly as before, the trees simply stopping as if they'd agreed to give the cabin space. But the cabin was different now. It had grown, expanded, sprouting additions like tumors. Windows had been added, dozens of them, each one showing a different face pressed against the glass. Some Jake recognized: Derek, Liza, Mateo, Sarah. Others were strangers, dozens of strangers, all staring out with the same empty expression. His collection, Rachel whispered, the faces he's worn. The cabin door stood open, inviting. They approached slowly, weapons ready. Jake carried a hatchet tipped with white ash. Rachel had the bow, arrows fletched with feathers dipped in ash and blessed by her grandmother's spirit. Remember, Rachel said, we need to get inside, find the center, force him to transform. Don't listen to the voices. Don't follow the sounds. Stay together. They entered. The interior was a labyrinth. Walls that hadn't existed before now blocked their path, corridors that should have led outside instead spiraling deeper into the structure. The faces watched from the windows, following their progress, and the air was filled with whispers, hundreds of voices, all speaking at once, all saying different things. Jake, I'm here. Rachel, help me. It's so cold. Come find me. They pressed on, ignoring the voices, following Rachel's instincts as she navigated by memory and intuition. The cabin seemed to shift around them, rooms appearing and disappearing, but Rachel moved with purpose, leading them deeper. Finally, they reached a door that was different from the others, older, made of wood that had been blackened by fire. Symbols were carved into its surface, protective signs that glowed faintly in the darkness. The center, Rachel said, he's in here. She pushed the door open. The room beyond was circular like the hogan, with a fire pit in the center. But this fire was black, burning without light, casting shadows that moved independently of the flames. And around the fire, arranged in a circle, were bodies. Derek, Liza, Mateo, Sarah, dozens of others all seated upright, their eyes open and staring, their chests moving with breath they no longer needed. In the center of the circle, tending the black fire, was a figure. It wore Derek's face, but wrong, stretched too wide, the eyes too far apart, the mouth opening and closing in a rhythm that didn't match the words it spoke. Welcome home, it said in Derek's voice. I've been waiting. Rachel raised her bow. Ashkiai, she said, her voice steady. I know your name, I know your sin. The thing wearing Derek's face turned slowly, its movements jerky and wrong, like a puppet with too many strings. Little Rachel, granddaughter of the meddler, you think a name has power. It does when it's spoken with intent. Rachel notched an arrow. You were human once. You had a brother, you killed him. You wear his face too, don't you, under all the others. The Skinwalker laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I wear them all. Every face I've taken I keep. I am Legion, I am eternal. Not anymore. Jake stepped forward, holding up the mask. This is your first face, The face you had before you became this. Remember it, Ashkiai. Remember who you were." The Skinwalker's laughter stopped. It stared at the mask, and for a moment something flickered in its eyes, recognition, perhaps, or memory. "No," it whispered. "Yes," Rachel said. "You were human, you had a name, you had a family. You destroyed all of that for power, but you can't destroy the memory. It's still there under all the faces. Remember, Ashkiai, remember your brother, remember what you did." The Skinwalker screamed. The sound was inhuman, a blend of every voice it had ever stolen, all screaming at once. The bodies around the fire began to twitch, to rise, their empty eyes turning toward Jake and Rachel. "Now," Rachel shouted. She released the arrow. It struck the Skinwalker in the chest, the ash-tipped point piercing the stolen flesh. The creature screamed again, and its form began to shift, to blur, faces flickering across its surface like a slideshow of the dead. Jake charged forward, hatchet raised. He swung at the creature's neck, aiming for the join between head and shoulders, where the Skinwalker magic was concentrated. The hatchet connected. White ash exploded in a cloud and the Skinwalker's form convulsed. The Derek face peeled away, revealing another face beneath, Lisa's, then Mateo's, then Sarah's, then dozens of others, faster and faster, a blur of stolen identities. Finally, the faces stopped changing. What remained was a man, middle-aged Navajo with a scar from temple to jaw, Ashkiai, the human he had once been. He looked at them with eyes that held something almost like gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. Then he dissolved into ash. The bodies around the fire collapsed, finally at rest. The black flames went out. The cabin began to shake, timbers groaning, the impossible architecture beginning to collapse. "Run!" Rachel grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him toward the door. They ran through corridors that were already falling apart, dodging falling beams and collapsing walls. Behind them, they heard the voices, hundreds of voices, all crying out at once, then fading into silence. They burst through the front door and into the clearing, the cabin collapsing behind them in a cloud of dust and ash. They kept running, not stopping until they reached the truck, not stopping until they were miles away, the cabin nothing but a memory in the rearview mirror. They didn't speak until they reached the highway. "Is it over?" Jake asked. Rachel was silent for a long moment. "For us, yes, he's dead. The faces he stole are released. Derek, Lisa, the others, they can rest now." But there are others." Rachel's voice was heavy. "Ashkiai wasn't the only Skinwalker. The witchery way is still out there. People are still making the choice, still killing for power. So we keep hunting. We keep hunting." Rachel looked at him, and Jake saw that the hardness in her eyes had softened, replaced by something like hope. Together. They drove into the sunrise, two survivors carrying white ash and hard-won knowledge. Behind them, the woods were silent once more, but not empty, never empty. The Skinwalkers were still out there, wearing faces, collecting voices, waiting for the next group of friends to venture too far from the safety of the known world. But now Jake and Rachel were waiting too. And they were learning. The highway stretched before them like a promise, straight and endless, leading away from the woods and toward something resembling safety. Jake sat in the passenger seat of Rachel's truck, watching the desert scroll past in shades of red and gold, and tried to process what had happened. They had killed it. They had actually killed a Skinwalker. They had spoken its true name, forced it to remember its humanity, and destroyed it with white ash and iron. Derek was avenged. Lisa, Mateo, Sarah, all the faces in the Skinwalker's collection were free. But Jake didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow, scraped out, as if the creature had taken something from him even in death. "You're thinking about the voices," Rachel said. She hadn't looked at him since they'd left the cabin, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. "How did you know?" "Because I'm thinking about them too." Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "All those people at war, All those voices it collected, they're free now, but where did they go? You said they could rest. I hope so. Rachel's voice was barely audible. But I've been thinking about what my grandmother said, about wandering the woods forever, calling others to their doom. What if? What if some of them don't rest? What if they become like it? Jake turned to look at her. You mean become skinwalkers? I mean become something. Rachel finally glanced at him, her eyes dark with exhaustion. The witchery way isn't just one thing, it's a path, a choice, but there are other paths, other choices. What if dying while wearing another face changes you? What if you don't just die, what if you become something else? You're saying Derek might. I'm saying I don't know. Rachel's voice cracked. I'm saying we killed the thing that wore him, but we don't know what happened to him, to any of them. They drove in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. The desert gave way to scrubland, then to the outskirts of civilization, gas stations and motels and the familiar comfort of fluorescent lights. They stopped at a Denny's, the same chain where Jake had spent that first night after fleeing his apartment. They ordered coffee and pancakes neither of them ate, sitting in a booth by the window where they could watch the parking lot. What do we do now? Jake asked. We learn, Rachel said. We prepare, we hunt. Hunt what? We don't even know if there are others. There are others. Rachel pulled out her phone, scrolling through something. I've been researching. Skinwalker sightings, disappearances, unexplained deaths. They're everywhere, Jake. Not just Navajo territory. Every indigenous culture has something like them. Wendigos in the north, Rougarou in the south, dozens of others. They go by different names, but they're the same thing. Humans who chose power over humanity. So we just drive around the country looking for them. No, Rachel put her phone away. We start with the ones we know about, the ones that have been documented, and we build a network, other hunters, other survivors, people who have seen what we've seen and lived to tell about it. You think those people exist? I know they do. Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. It was plain white with just a phone number and a symbol, a circle with 4 lines radiating outward like a compass rose. I found this in my grandmother's things. She was part of something, a group that fought these things. Jake took the card, turning it over in his fingers. Did she ever mention? No, she kept it secret, protected me from it. Rachel's expression softened. But she left me the card. She knew eventually I'd need it. They called the number that night, from a motel room that smelled of cigarettes and industrial cleaner. A woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice young but tired. You've reached the Hollow Road Society, she said. If you're calling about a sighting, press 1. If you're calling about joining, press 2. If you're calling about a family member, press 3. Rachel pressed 2. The woman came back on the line. Name and location. Rachel Blackhorse, I'm in Arizona. My grandmother was. Blackhorse, the woman's voice changed, became more alert. Josephine Blackhorse's granddaughter. Yes. A pause, then, stay where you are. Someone will come to you. Don't go outside after dark. Don't answer voices that call your name. We'll be there by morning. The line went dead. They waited. Neither slept, though they took turns pretending to, sitting by the window with weapons ready. The white ash was gone, used up in the fight at the cabin, but they had iron and salt and the knowledge of what worked. True to the woman's word, a car pulled into the motel parking lot at dawn. It was a beat-up Subaru, not unlike the one Jake had driven to Whispering Pines, with tinted windows and a bumper sticker that read, I break for nothing. A man got out. He was middle-aged, graying, with the build of someone who had been athletic once but had gone soft with time. He wore a leather jacket over a flannel shirt, and his eyes, dark and watchful, scanned the parking lot with the precision of someone who had done this many times before. Rachel Blackhorse, he called. Rachel stepped out of the room, Jake behind her. That's me. The man approached slowly, hands visible, showing he wasn't armed, or at least not obviously. "Name's Vance. Hollow Road Society. Your grandmother saved my life once. 1987, New Mexico." She never mentioned. She wouldn't have. Vance stopped a few feet away, close enough to shake hands but far enough to react if something went wrong. She was private, but she left instructions. If any of her family ever called the number, we were to come. No questions asked. Why? Vance's expression darkened. Because she knew. She knew the Skinwalkers would come for her family eventually. It's what they do. They collect bloodlines where family faces, use the connection to hunt others. She spent her life trying to break that cycle. Rachel's hand went to her throat. "My family is safe for now. We've been watching." Vance reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "But there's something you need to see." He handed the paper to Rachel. She unfolded it, and Jake saw over her shoulder that it was a photograph, black and white, grainy, showing a group of people standing in front of a cabin. Whispering Pines. "This was taken in 1973, Vance said. "The original group that built the cabin. They were researchers, studying Navajo folklore. They disappeared one by one over the course of a year." Rachel stared at the photo. "I don't understand. Why are you showing me this?" "Look at the faces." She looked, Jake looked, and then they saw it. In the back row, partially obscured by shadow, stood a figure. The face was hard to make out, but the posture was familiar. The way the head tilted, the way the shoulders hunched. It was Derek. Or rather, it was wearing Derek's face. "That's impossible," Jake breathed. "Derek wasn't even born in 1973. "No," Vance agreed. "But the Skinwalker was. The thing that wore him has been active for at least 50 years, probably longer, and it's not the only one that has worn that particular face." "What do you mean?" Vance took the photo back, folding it carefully. "The Skinwalkers share faces, pass them around like costumes. If one of them finds a face that works, a face that lures people in, that inspires trust, they all use it. Derek's face has been in circulation for decades. So the thing we killed wasn't the first to wear him and won't be the last." Vance's eyes met Rachel's. "Your grandmother knew this. She tried to warn you in her way. The cabin, the territory, it's a hunting ground, has been for generations. You didn't stumble into it by accident. You were called." "Called?" "The Skinwalkers can sense bloodlines. They can smell the potential in people. Your grandmother was a powerful medicine woman. She held them back for years, but she couldn't stop them from sensing you." Vance gestured at Jake. "And you were friends with someone whose face was already in their collection. You were marked the moment you met Derek." Jake felt sick. So this was always going to happen. "No," Vance's voice hardened. "You had a choice. You always have a choice. You could have run, hidden, spent your life looking over your shoulder, but you didn't. You fought back. You killed one of them. That makes you something special." "Special how?" "It makes you hunters." Vance smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Welcome to the Hollow Road Society." They spent the next 3 weeks in training. Vance took them to a compound in rural Utah, a sprawling property surrounded by fences topped with white ash and iron. Other hunters lived there, 24 men and women of various ages, all bearing the scars of encounters with the supernatural. They learned to fight, not just with weapons but with knowledge, how to identify skinwalkers by their movements, their speech patterns, the way their shadows fell wrong. They learned about other creatures too, wendigos and raugaru, fae and spirits, things that had no name in any human language. They learned the history of the Hollow Road Society, founded in 1887 by survivors of the Donner Party who had discovered that something in the mountains had been hunting them even before the snow fell. The society had been fighting the supernatural ever since, a secret war waged in shadows and silence. And they learned about the Skinwalker's true nature. They're not just witches, Vance explained one night, sitting around a fire pit similar to the one at Whispering Pines but protected by circles of ash and salt. There's something older. The witchery way is just one path to becoming what they are. There are others. Like what? Jake asked. Murder is the most common, but any act of profound betrayal, any destruction of the natural order can create a skinwalker. Vance poked the fire with a stick. There was a case in the 1920s, a man who killed his entire family to collect insurance money. He became something, still out there somewhere wearing their faces. And we can kill them. Sometimes. Vance's expression was grim. White Ash Works, Ironworks, knowing their true name works, but they're learning too, adapting. The old methods don't always work anymore. So what do? We get creative. Vance pulled out a journal, old, leather-bound, filled with handwritten notes. This is the Society's grimoire. Every hunter who has ever faced a skinwalker and lived has added to it. Their methods, their successes, their failures. We study it. We learn. We improve. Jake took the journal, feeling the weight of history in his hands. And then we hunt. Their first assignment came 6 weeks after joining the Society. A series of disappearances in rural Montana near the Canadian border. 7 people missing over 3 months, all from the same small town. The pattern was familiar. Silence before the taking, voices heard in the woods, faces seen at windows. It's wearing a local, Vance said, briefing them in the compound's war room. Sheriff's deputy named Carl Haskins. Been missing for 2 weeks, but people keep reporting sightings. He's been knocking on doors, asking to come in, using his authority to get people to open up. Classic skinwalker behavior, Rachel said. She had changed in the weeks of training, harder, more focused, her grandmother's knowledge combining with the Society's techniques to make her formidable. How do we approach? Carefully, Vance spread a map on the table. The town is here. The woods where the disappearances happen are here. We think it's denning in an abandoned mine shaft. You two plus Martinez and Acafer, they're experienced. They'll guide you. They flew to Montana that night, landing in a town so small it barely qualified for the name. The air was cold, crisp, smelling of pine and impending snow. Martinez and Acafer met them at the airport, both women, both veterans of a dozen hunts, both carrying themselves with the relaxed confidence of people who had faced death and found it wanting. Newbies, Acafer said, looking them up and down. Vance says you killed one already. We did, Jake said. Good, Acafer smiled, and it was almost warm. Means you won't freeze up. Come on, we've got work to do. They spent 2 days preparing, scouting the town, learning the terrain. The skinwalker, wearing Deputy Haskins' face, had been seen near the edge of town, always at dusk, always alone. It hadn't tried to enter any homes yet, but the pattern suggested it was building up to something. It's testing the boundaries, Martinez explained, seeing how far it can push before someone notices. Someone has noticed, Rachel said, the disappearances. Those were practice, learning how to wear the faces, how to mimic the voices. Martinez checked her weapon, a shotgun loaded with shells packed with white ash and iron filings. Now it's ready for the main event. They set up an ambush on the 3rd night. Jake and Rachel would pose as stranded motorists on the road near the woods, engine trouble, vulnerable and alone. Martinez and Acafer would be hidden in the trees, ready to strike when the skinwalker approached. It was cold, the kind of cold that bit through layers and found your bones. Jake sat on the hood of the decoy car, Rachel beside him, both trying to look helpless and lost. You ever think about what would have happened, Rachel said quietly, if we'd never gone to that cabin? Every day. And Jake was silent for a moment. I think we would have found another way to meet it. Vance was right, we were marked. It would have come for us eventually, one way or another. So this is better. This is, Jake searched for the words. This is taking control. We didn't choose to be hunted, but we can choose to hunt in return. Rachel nodded slowly. My grandmother would have liked you. I wish I could have met her. She would have said you talk too much. Rachel smiled, the first real smile Jake had seen since the cabin, but she would have been glad you're here. The sound of footsteps reached them, heavy, deliberate, coming from the woods. Jake tensed, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Evening, a voice called, "Car trouble." The figure emerged from the trees. Deputy Carl Haskins, according to the photos they'd seen, middle-aged, heavyset, with a kind face and tired eyes. But the way he moved was wrong. Too smooth, too controlled, as if he was wearing a skin that didn't quite fit. Engine died, Jake said, trying to sound helpless. We were just what? The Skinwalker smiled, and the smile didn't reach its eyes. Just waiting, just hoping someone would come along. It was close now, close enough to smell. Not human, not animal, but something in between. Something that smelled of rot and cedar and old blood. We need help, Rachel said, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. Can you? I can do lots of things. The Skinwalker's voice shifted, becoming deeper, more resonant. I can be anyone you need, your friend, your lover, your... Now, Martinez shouted. The shotgun blast caught the Skinwalker in the chest, throwing it backward. It screamed, a sound like tearing metal, and began to change, faces flickering across its surface. Haskins, a woman Jake didn't recognize, a child, dozens of others too fast to track. Name it, Aquifer yelled. Find its true name. Rachel stepped forward, holding up a photograph, Haskins' driver's license stolen from his house. Carl Haskins, she shouted. You were Carl Haskins. You were human, remember you're... The Skinwalker laughed, the sound cutting through Rachel's words. Carl is gone. I am Legion, I am. No, Jake moved forward, holding something in his hand, a locket taken from Haskins' bedroom. Inside was a photo of a young woman smiling with a child in her arms. You had a wife. You had a son. You were a deputy because you wanted to protect people. Remember, Carl, remember who you were. The Skinwalker's laughter stopped. It stared at the locket, and for a moment something flickered in its eyes, recognition, memory, humanity. Sarah, it whispered, little Michael. Yes, Jake kept his voice gentle. You loved them. You were going to retire next year. You were going to take Sarah to Florida, remember. The Skinwalker convulsed. Its form began to shift, not between faces this time, but between states, human and monster, solid and shadow, present and absent. Now, Martinez fired again. An Aquifer threw a jar of white ash that exploded against the creature's chest. The Skinwalker screamed, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and then it collapsed. When the ash settled, there was nothing left but a pile of clothes and a smell of burning hair. It's done, Martinez said, lowering her shotgun. Good work, newbies. They buried the clothes in a grave marked with protective symbols, said words over the site that Rachel's grandmother had taught her, and drove back to town in silence. It was their first successful hunt. It wouldn't be their last. Over the next year, Jake and Rachel became the society's most effective team. They hunted skinwalkers across the American Southwest, tracking them through reservations and rural communities, learning their patterns, perfecting their techniques. They developed new methods. White ash worked, but it was hard to come by in quantity. They experimented with substitutes, salt blessed by medicine men, iron forged in specific ways, sound frequencies that disrupted the skinwalker's mimicry. They saved lives, dozens of them, families who had been marked for death, communities that had been living in fear. They became something like heroes in the hidden world of supernatural hunters, though they never sought recognition. And they kept searching for answers. Why do they collect faces? Jake asked one night, sitting in another motel room, another case file spread before them. What's the point? Power, Rachel said. Each face they wear, each voice they steal makes them stronger, more real, less human. But why? What do they want? Rachel was silent for a long moment. I don't think they want anything. I think they're hungry. Hungry for what? Connection, identity, the things they gave up when they chose the witchery way. She closed the file, looking tired. They wear our faces because they don't have their own anymore. They steal our voices because they've forgotten how to speak with their own. They're trying to be human again, but they can't, so they just keep taking. That's sad, Jake said. It's terrifying. Rachel met his eyes. Because it means they can never stop. They'll keep hunting, keep wearing, keep collecting forever, unless someone stops them. Like us. Like us. They kept hunting. Through the seasons, through the years, through cases that blurred together into a tapestry of horror and hope. They lost friends. Martinez fell in New Mexico, Acaffer in Alaska. They gained new partners, trained new recruits, built the society's knowledge base until it was the most comprehensive resource on skinwalkers in existence. And always in the back of their minds, they remembered Whispering Pines, remembered Derek, Lisa, Mateo, Sarah, remembered the thing that had worn their faces and laughed. 10 years after that first hunt, they returned to the cabin site. It had changed. The clearing was overgrown, the cabin long since collapsed and rotted away. But the silence remained, that absolute, aggressive silence that marked Skinwalker territory. It's still here, Rachel said, her voice barely audible. The territory, even without the cabin, it's still here. They'll come back, Jake agreed. Another one eventually. Then we'll be waiting. They placed markers around the clearing, sensors, cameras, traps loaded with white ash. They established a monitoring station nearby, staffed by society members on rotation. They turned the hunting ground into a trap, ready for the next skinwalker to claim it. And they waited. It took 3 years. 3 years of silence, of monitoring, of preparation. Then the sensors triggered. They arrived at dawn, a team of 6, armed with everything the society had developed. The skinwalker was there, wearing a new face, a hiker who had gone missing 2 weeks before, young and handsome and smiling with too many teeth. Welcome back, it said, in a voice that wasn't quite human. I've been waiting. We know, Jake said. We've been waiting too. The fight was brief. They were ready, practiced, efficient. They spoke the skinwalker's true name, forced it to remember, destroyed it with ash and iron. As it died, it looked at Jake with eyes that suddenly seemed almost human. Thank you, it whispered. Then it was gone. They stood in the clearing as the sun rose, watching the ash settle. Rachel took Jake's hand, and they stood together in silence, 2 hunters who had become something more than human themselves, something harder and sharper and necessary. Do you ever regret it? Rachel asked. This life? Jake thought about the question, thought about the friends he'd lost, the sleep he'd missed, the normal life he'd given up, thought about the faces he'd saved, the families protected, the evil destroyed. No, he said, I don't regret it. Good, Rachel squeezed his hand. Neither do I. They walked back to their vehicle as the forest woke around them, birds singing, insects humming, the natural order restored. Behind them, the clearing was just a clearing, the cabin just a memory, the skinwalkers just ash on the wind. But they would be back. They always came back. And Jake and Rachel would be waiting. The hunt never ended, but neither did they. The hollow voices. The transfer order arrived on a Tuesday, printed on paper so old it crumbled at the edges, smelling of cedar and something else, something that might have been ash. Ranger Eli Carter read it 3 times, certain there had been a mistake. Black Pines West Station, a posting that hadn't been staffed in 3 years, a station that no one wanted, that no one asked for, that existed in the agency's records like a ghost. There's been an error, he said, standing in his supervisor's office. I'm supposed to be transferring to Yellowstone. His supervisor, a man named Morrison who had the look of someone who had seen too much and said too little, didn't look up from his desk. No error, Carter. Black Pines needs someone. You're someone. Sir, with respect, that station is in your file. Morrison finally looked up, and Eli saw something in his eyes, pity perhaps, or warning. You've got a reputation, Carter, handling problem posts, places where things happen. I handled a bear attack in Montana. You handled 3 disappearances in Montana, 3 hikers who went into the woods and never came out. You found them. I found their bodies. You found them. Morrison pushed the transfer order across the desk. Black Pines is worse. It's been worse for decades. The Cherokee warned about it. The early settlers knew about it. We've been trying to keep people out for 50 years, but they keep going in. Hikers, campers, kids looking for a thrill. And they keep disappearing. They keep disappearing. Morrison's voice dropped. The last ranger stationed there lasted 6 months. He transferred out, requested reassignment to Alaska. Alaska, Carter. He chose polar bears and 6 months of darkness over Black Pines. Why? Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled out a key, old iron with teeth that looked almost like symbols. The station logbook. Read it. Then decide if you want the transfer to Yellowstone. Eli took the key. And if I still want Yellowstone? Then you can have it. Morrison's eyes were hard, but I don't think you will. Black Pines National Forest was in the Appalachian Mountains, a remote wilderness that straddled 3 states and swallowed hikers whole. The West Station was at the forest's edge, where the mountains met the plains, where the old growth gave way to something older. Eli drove for 2 days, following roads that grew progressively smaller and more overgrown. He passed through towns that seemed to huddle against the forest, their residents eyeing his Forest Service truck with suspicion and fear. You going to Black Pines? A gas station attendant asked, filling his tank. Station's been closed for years. Reopening it. The attendant's face went pale. Why would you do that? It's my job. Your job? The attendant shook his head. Man, there are easier ways to die. Eli didn't respond. He had heard similar comments at every stop, warnings, superstitions, the kind of local knowledge that official channels dismissed as folklore. But Eli had learned to respect folklore. In his experience, it usually had roots in something real. He reached the station at dusk on the 2nd day. The building was exactly what he expected, a log cabin, weathered by decades of mountain storms, with a porch that sagged and windows that reflected the dying light like blind eyes. But it was the silence that struck him first. No birdsong, no insect hum, no wind moving through the branches, just silence, absolute and complete, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. He grabbed his bag and approached the door, key in hand. The lock was old, rusted, but the key turned smoothly, as if the mechanism had been waiting for him. The interior was surprisingly clean. Dusty, yes, and smelling of cedar and mothballs, but someone had prepared it for occupancy. There was a bed, a desk, a wood-burning stove, and shelves lined with supplies, canned goods, medical kits, emergency equipment. And on the desk, a leather-bound logbook. Eli set down his bag and opened it. The pages were filled with handwriting in various styles, different rangers, different years, different voices. He flipped to the most recent entries, the ones from 3 years ago. The last entry was written in a hand that shook, the letters barely legible. Day 187. The voices are getting louder. They know my name now. They call to me from the trees, from the rocks, from the spaces between. I can't sleep. I can't think. I see them in my dreams, the ones who wore faces, who took voices, who became something else. I have to leave. Tomorrow I'll request transfer. I can't stay. No one should stay. If you're reading this, if you're the next ranger, don't follow the voices. Don't go into the closed sector. Don't say their name. The entry ended there. Eli turned the page, but the rest of the book was blank. He sat in the silence, reading the entry again, and felt the first stirrings of unease. This wasn't just a problem post. This was something else. Something that had driven a man to abandon his career, his pension, his sanity. But Eli had faced worse. He had tracked bears through blizzards. He had found bodies in ravines. He had faced the dark and come back whole. He could handle black pines. The first 3 days were uneventful. Eli settled in, organized supplies, checked the perimeter. The forest was silent, yes, but not threatening. Just, quiet, peaceful even. He told himself the previous ranger had been unstable. The silence had gotten to him, made him imagine things. There was nothing supernatural about black pines, just isolation and shadows and the human mind's tendency to create patterns where none existed. Then the campers disappeared. The call came on his 4th day, crackling through the radio that connected him to dispatch. 6 hikers, overdue from a 3-day trip. Last known location, Dead Man's Fork, a trail that bordered the closed sector. Closed sector? Eli asked. Old logging road, blocked off years ago. Signs say no entry, but people ignore them. I'll check it out. He drove as far as the road allowed, then hiked the rest of the way. The trail to Dead Man's Fork was overgrown, barely passable, marked with sun-bleached signs that read no entry and danger in faded letters. And something else. Animal bones tied to the trees with twine, old, weathered, arranged in patterns that might have been deliberate. Cherokee warning markers, Eli muttered, recognizing the style from his training. Keep out, evil here. He should have turned back, should have called for backup, for specialists, for people who understood what these markers meant. But 6 people were missing, and Eli had never turned back from a search. He pushed through the barrier, following the trail deeper into the closed sector. The silence grew deeper, more aggressive. The trees grew closer together, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sun. And he found the campsite. Tents slashed from the inside, gear strewn across the clearing as if something had burst out, a cooler still full of fresh food, and the fire pit. The fire pit was filled with teeth. Human teeth, dozens of them blackened by fire, arranged in patterns that made Eli's stomach turn. What the hell, he whispered. He searched the area looking for tracks, for signs of struggle, for anything that would explain what had happened. And he found them, 3 sets of prints in the mud. 2 human, sprinting, running from something. And 1 wrong. The prints changed mid-stride. Boot to bare foot to something with elongated toes and a staggered gait, like it had learned to walk by watching humans and hadn't quite gotten it right. Eli photographed everything, his hands shaking despite his training. This wasn't a bear attack. This wasn't a fall. This was something else. He followed the tracks deeper into the forest, moving as quietly as he could, his hand on the sidearm at his belt. The tracks led to a hollowed-out tree, massive and ancient, its interior carved into a space big enough for 2 people. Inside he found them. A couple, young, trembling, their eyes wide with terror. They were pressed against the back of the hollow, clutching each other, barely breathing. "Rangers," Eli said, keeping his voice gentle. "I'm Ranger Carter, I'm here to help." The woman Jess, according to her ID, let out a sob. "You can't help, no one can help, they're still out there." "Who's still out there?" "Our friends." The man Mark, his voice was hollow, broken. They came back wrong." "What do you mean, wrong?" Jess looked at him, and Eli saw something in her eyes that he had seen before, in Montana, in the eyes of the survivor of the bear attack. The look of someone who had seen something that shouldn't exist. "Their faces," she whispered. "Their faces were sagging like they were wearing masks that didn't fit, and their mouths," she stopped, shuddering. "Their mouths were too wide," Mark finished. "And they were repeating things we had said, Things we had said hours before in the tent in private. They knew our words. They knew our voices. They were wearing our friends, Jess said, and started to cry. They were wearing them like costumes. Eli felt ice in his veins. How many? 4. Mark's voice was barely audible. Tom, Sarah, Kevin, Lisa, they came back at dusk. They said they had found something, a cave. They wanted to show us, but their voices were wrong, and when they got closer we saw. You saw what? Their faces weren't right. Jess was rocking now back and forth, a self-soothing motion. And their shadows had too many arms. Eli thought about the tracks he had found, the changing footprints, the staggered gait. You ran, he said. We ran, Mark nodded. They followed. They called to us using our friends' voices, saying things only our friends would know. But we didn't stop. We found this tree hid inside. They've been out there all night calling, searching. Are they still human? Jess asked, her eyes pleading. Our friends, are they still in there? Eli didn't answer. He didn't know how. He helped them out of the tree, supporting them as they stumbled through the forest. The sun was setting, the light fading, and Eli knew they needed to move fast. Whatever was out there, it would be hunting in earnest once darkness fell. We need to get to the trailhead, he said. My truck is there. We can drive out, call for backup. They won't let us leave, Mark said. They never let anyone leave. They'll try to stop us. Jess's voice was flat, resigned. They always try. Who? Eli asked. What are they? But before they could answer, the forest answered for them. A voice came from the trees, Tom's voice according to Jess's reaction. Warm, friendly, utterly wrong. Jess, Mark, we found it, the cave. You have to see. Don't listen, Jess whispered, her hand tightening on Eli's arm. It's not Tom, it's wearing him. Jess, another voice, Sarah's, high and excited. Come on, we're waiting. Ignore them, Eli said, moving faster, practically dragging the couple through the underbrush. Keep walking. But the voices multiplied. 4 of them now, calling from different directions, surrounding them like a net. Mark, buddy, where are you going? Jess, it's cold out here. Come back to the fire. We miss you. We love you. Don't listen, Eli repeated, but he could feel the weight of the voices, their familiarity, their pull. They sounded exactly like friends would sound, exactly like people in need would sound. Eli. He froze. The voice was his own. Eli, help me, I'm hurt. Don't, Jess gasped. It's not you, it's learning, it learns fast. Eli, his own voice coming from the trees to his left. I found something important, come see. Keep moving, Eli commanded, his voice harsh with fear. Don't stop. They ran. The voices followed, multiplying, surrounding them, using voices they knew, voices they loved, voices they couldn't ignore. Mark, please, I'm scared. Jess, don't leave me. Eli, it's dark, I'm lost. Branches snapped behind them, footsteps heavy and wrong following their trail. Eli didn't look back. He knew what he would see, faces that sagged, mouths too wide, shadows with too many arms. They reached the trailhead as the last light was dying. Eli's truck was there, untouched, waiting. They piled in, Eli gunning the engine, tires spinning on gravel. In the rearview mirror, Eli saw them. 4 figures at the tree line. Tom, Sarah, Kevin, Lisa, or rather things wearing their faces, their clothes, their voices. They stood together watching the truck leave, and as Eli watched, their jaws unhinged, impossibly wide, and they laughed. The sound followed them for miles. They drove to the nearest hospital, 40 miles away, Eli radioing ahead for medical support and law enforcement. Jess and Mark were in shock, barely responsive, their eyes fixed on some horror only they could see. At the hospital, Eli gave his report. Disappearances, strange tracks, survivors with impossible stories. The authorities listened, took notes, exchanged glances that said they didn't believe him but didn't know what else to believe either. "We'll send a team," the sheriff said. "Search the area, find your campers." "Don't," Eli said. "Not at night, not without preparation." "Preparation for what?" Eli thought about the teeth in the fire pit, the changing tracks, the voices, for something that wears faces. The sheriff looked at him like he was crazy, but he agreed to wait until morning. Eli spent the night at the hospital, sitting with Jess and Mark, listening to their fragmented stories. They talked about the cave their friends had found, about the symbols carved into the walls, about the thing they had awakened. "It was sleeping," Jess whispered, "for so long, and we woke it up." "What is it?" Eli asked. The old people knew. Mark's eyes were closed, his voice distant. "The Cherokee, they had stories about the Ye-Naldlusha, the Skinwalkers." "Witches," Jess said. "Evil ones, they wear faces, they steal voices, they become what they wear." "And your friends woke one up." "They found its den, its collection," Mark shuddered. "Faces, dozens of faces, all still alive, all still screaming." Eli thought about the logbook. The warnings, "Don't follow the voices." "How do we stop it?" he asked. Jess looked at him, and for a moment her eyes were clear. "You don't, you run, you hide, you pray it finds someone else to wear. There has to be a way." "White ash," Mark said. "Iron mirrors the old ways, but even those don't always work. Not if it's old, not if it's strong." Eli remembered the iron key Morrison had given him, the Cherokee markers on the trees, the station's supplies, including jars of white powder he had assumed was flour. "I have to go back," he said. "No." Jess grabbed his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "If you go back, it will wear you. It will take your face, your voice, your memories, and you'll be trapped forever, watching it use you to hurt others." "I have to try." "Then you're already lost." Jess released him, turning away. "Just like we are, just like everyone who goes into Black Pines." Eli left the hospital at dawn, driving back to the station with the rising sun at his back. He knew what he had to do. He had to understand what was in those woods, had to find a way to stop it, or at least contain it. The station was as he had left it, silent and waiting. He went inside, grabbed the jars of white ash, the iron tools, the supplies that suddenly made sense. He loaded them into his truck, along with mirrors from the bathroom, salt from the kitchen, anything that might work against something that wore faces. Then he sat at the desk and opened the logbook again, not to the recent entries but to the beginning, to the first rangers, the first warnings, the first encounters with whatever lived in Black Pines. The entries went back decades, stories of disappearances, of voices in the night, of faces seen at windows that didn't belong there, stories of rangers who had gone into the closed sector and never returned, stories of others who had returned, wrong. And one entry from 50 years ago that made Eli's blood run cold. "I found it, the source, a cave deep in the closed sector where the trees grow in spirals. Inside, a collection of faces, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all still alive, all still aware. And in the center, the thing that wore them. It spoke to me. It said it was old, older than the mountains, older than the people who had first walked these woods. It said it was waiting for enough faces, enough voices, enough material to become something else, something new. It said the wearing was just the beginning, the larval stage, and when it had enough it would emerge, it would spread, it would become." The entry ended there. The ranger who wrote it had transferred out the next day, retired early, moved to Florida, and never spoke of Black Pines again. Eli sat in the silence, the logbook open before him, and understood at last what he was facing. Not just a skinwalker, not just a witch who wore faces, something older, something evolving, something that was using the wearing to become something else. And it was almost ready. He stood, gathering his supplies, and walked out into the morning. The forest was still silent, still waiting, But now Eli understood the silence. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of voices that had been stolen, faces that had been worn, lives that had been consumed. He was going back into the closed sector, back to the cave, back to the thing that wore his voice and waited for him to come. Because someone had to stop it, and Eli Carter had never turned back from a fight. Eli entered the closed sector at noon, when the sun was highest and the shadows were shortest. He carried white ash in jars, iron nails in his pockets, mirrors strapped to his back, and the logbook's knowledge heavy in his mind. The Cherokee markers were still there, bones tied to trees in warning patterns. Eli touched them as he passed, whispering words he didn't understand but somehow knew: protection, warding, the old ways that predated the Forest Service by millennia. The trail to the cave was clearer than it had been yesterday, as if something wanted him to find it. Eli didn't trust the ease of the path, but he had no choice. The thing that wore faces was in there, in the dark, wearing Tom and Sarah and Kevin and Lisa, wearing them and waiting for more. He found the cave entrance at mid-afternoon, a gaping wound in the mountainside, surrounded by spiral trees that seemed to lean toward it like supplicants. The air smelled of cedar and rot and something else, something that might have been anticipation. Eli didn't hesitate. He walked into the dark. The cave was worse than the logbook had described. The walls were lined with faces, not masks, not trophies, but actual human faces, stretched and preserved and somehow still alive. Eyes moved, following his progress. Mouths opened and closed in silent screams. And the voices. The voices were everywhere. Whispers from the walls, from the ceiling, from the stone itself. Hundreds of voices, thousands, all speaking at once, all saying different things. Help me. Run. It's wearing me. I can't remember my name. Please. 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 Eli pressed on, the white ash in his hands, the iron nails ready. The cave sloped downward, deeper into the mountain, and the faces grew thicker, the voices louder, until he was walking through a tunnel of screaming mouths and pleading eyes. Then he reached the chamber. It was vast, larger than the mountain should have allowed, a cathedral of stone and suffering. The faces here weren't just on the walls, they were suspended from the ceiling, arranged in spirals that matched the trees outside, forming patterns that hurt to look at. And in the center, on a throne of bone and wood, sat the thing that wore them all. It had no face of its own, just a smooth expanse of pale skin, featureless except for a mouth that opened and closed in sync with the voices. But as Eli watched, features began to emerge: nose, eyes, cheeks, shifting and changing, cycling through the faces in its collection. Ranger Carter. The voice was layered, multiplied, coming from everywhere at once. You came. I came to end this. End? The thing laughed, and the laughter was like breaking glass. You cannot end what has no beginning. I am old, Ranger, older than your species, older than your gods. I was wearing faces when your ancestors were still crawling in the mud. Then you've worn enough. Never enough. The thing shifted on its throne, and Eli saw that it had too many limbs, arms and legs that bent in wrong directions, joints that shouldn't exist. The wearing is never complete. There is always more to become. Become what? The thing smiled, though it had no face to smile with. Everything, everyone. I will wear the world, Ranger. I will become the world. And then there will be no more separation. No more loneliness, just me, wearing everything. You're insane. I am evolution. The thing stood, unfolding to a height that shouldn't have been possible in the chamber. You humans, you cling to your individuality like a drowning man clings to a raft, but you are not individuals. You are just faces, voices, masks that can be worn, and I am the wearer. Eli raised his hand, the white ash ready. I know your weakness. Weakness? The thing laughed again. I have no weakness. Mirrors. Eli pulled the mirror from his back, holding it up. You hate your reflection. You can't stand to see what you've become. He angled the mirror toward the thing, catching the dim light of the chamber, forcing it to see itself. The scream was unlike anything Eli had ever heard. It was the sound of a soul being torn apart, of identity being stripped away, of something ancient and terrible being forced to confront its own emptiness. The thing convulsed, its form blurring, losing coherence. For a moment, Eli saw beneath the wearing, saw the thing's true nature, the void that existed where a self should have been. No, it screamed, in voices that were suddenly individual, suddenly human. No, I am everything, I am everyone, I am. You're nothing. Eli threw the white ash, the powder exploding against the thing's chest. You're just a thief, a parasite, and I'm ending you. The ash burned, not with fire but with something else, light truth, the essence of what the thing had given up to become what it was. The thing screamed again, and this time the scream was just one voice. Old, terrified, human. Please, it whispered. I don't remember who I was. Then let go, Eli said. Let go of the wearing, let go of the faces, remember. For a moment something flickered in the thing's form. A face, human, terrified, the face of whoever it had been before it chose this path. A man, young once, scared always. I was. The voice was weak, fading. My name, I had a name. Tell me. The thing convulsed, the faces on the walls screaming in unison. I can't. Then I'll end you. Eli raised the iron nail, ready to strike. Wait, the thing held up a hand, and Eli saw that it was shaking. I can release them, the faces, the voices. I can let them go. Do it. The thing closed its eyes that had borrowed from 1,000 faces, and began to speak. Words in a language Eli didn't recognize, old and harsh and full of pain. As it spoke, the faces on the walls began to fade, the voices growing quieter, the suffering slowly easing. What are you doing? Eli asked. Giving them peace. The thing's voice was weak, barely audible. They were trapped, bound to me. I didn't know they were still aware, I thought they were just masks, just material. They were people. They were. The thing opened its eyes, and for the first time they were its own, dark, human, full of something that might have been regret. I forgot that. I forgot so much. The chamber was changing. The faces were gone, dissolved into light, leaving only smooth stone. The voices were silent. The spiral patterns were fading, the geometry becoming random, natural. What happens now? Eli asked. Now, the man looked at him with eyes that held centuries of memory. Now I die. The wearing was all that kept me alive. Without it, I'm just old. How old? Old enough. The man smiled, and it was a human smile, sad and tired. I was born in a time, before your people's time. I chose this path because I was afraid of death, afraid of being forgotten, and I became this. You can choose again. No, the man shook his head. The choice was made, the path was walked, there is no going back. He looked around the empty chamber. But I can choose how it ends. I can choose to let them go, to let myself go. Will that stop the others? Others? The man's eyes sharpened. There are no others. I was, the only one. The logbook said. The logbook said what I wanted it to say. The man laughed, weak and bitter. I planted those stories, those warnings to keep people away, to keep them from finding me, from stopping me. Then the other skinwalkers are just stories, legends, folklore. The man was fading now, his form becoming translucent. I was, the only one, the first, the last. But I've heard. You've heard echoes, reflections, the fear I created spreading, becoming its own thing. The man reached out, his hand passing through Eli's shoulder without touching. I'm sorry for everything, for the faces, for the voices, for the fear. Why? Eli asked. Why did you do it? Because I was lonely. The man's voice was barely a whisper, because I wanted to be everyone so I would never be alone, but I didn't understand. Wearing someone isn't the same as being with them. I was more alone than ever, surrounded by faces, by voices, by people who hated me, who feared me, who I had trapped. You could have let them go. I couldn't. The man was almost gone now, just a shimmer in the air. The wearing, it consumes you, it becomes you. I couldn't stop, I couldn't. He vanished. The chamber was empty, just stone and silence and the memory of screaming. Eli stood alone, the mirror in his hand, the white ash scattered on the floor, and felt the weight of what he had done. He had killed something, or rather he had helped something die. An ancient evil, yes, but also an ancient tragedy. A person who had made a choice long ago and never stopped paying for it. He walked out of the cave into the afternoon light. The spiral trees were dead, their branches drooping, their patterns fading. The Cherokee markers were still there, but they seemed different now, warnings of something that was gone, rather than something that was waiting. He found the 4 campers, Tom, Sarah, Kevin, Lisa, at the cave entrance. They were alive, unconscious, their faces their own again. The thing had released them before it died, given them back their lives. Eli carried them out, one by one, to his truck. They woke as he drove, confused and scared, with no memory of what had happened. Just gaps in their minds, missing time, the sense of something terrible that they couldn't quite recall. He took them to the hospital, to Jess and Mark, to the reunion of friends who had survived something they would never understand. The doctors called it exposure, dehydration, shared hallucination. The authorities called it a miracle. Eli called it finished. But as he drove back to the station, he heard the voice. Just once, just for a moment, coming from the trees. "Thank you." He stopped the truck, got out, searched the forest. Nothing, just silence, just peace. He returned to the station and packed his things. The transfer to Yellowstone was still waiting, and now he wanted it, needed it. Black Pines was safe now, the evil gone, but Eli couldn't stay. The memories were too heavy, the faces too real. He left the key on the desk, the logbook open to the final entry. His own entry, written in a hand that shook. "It's over, the wearing has ended, the faces are free. The voices are silent, but remember, the fear remains. The stories remain. And somewhere in the dark, something else might be listening, something else might be learning. The wearing was just one path. There are others. Stay vigilant, stay human, and never ever give up your face." He locked the door and drove away, not looking back. The station stood empty, waiting for the next ranger, the next story, the next chapter in the long history of Black Pines. But for now, it was over. For now, the hollow was silent. 3 months after Black Pines, Eli Carter stood on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean and tried to forget. The coastal park was everything Black Pines wasn't: bright, open, full of life. Tourists laughed on the beaches below. Seagulls cried overhead. The wind carried salt and sun instead of cedar and rot. He had transferred to Yellowstone first, as planned, but the mountains had felt too close, too enclosed, too much like the hollow. So he had requested another transfer, and another, until he ended up here on the edge of the continent, where the land met the sea and there were no trees to whisper in the dark. He was a ranger again, doing the work he loved, protecting the wilderness, helping visitors, maintaining trails. The work was good. The work was clean. The work didn't involve faces that weren't faces or voices that weren't human. But he couldn't forget. Every night when the wind died and the ocean went still, he heard them. The voices from the cave, the whispers of the faces, the final thank you from the thing that had warned them all. And sometimes, when the moon was dark and the fog rolled in, he heard something else. Twigs snapping, footsteps on the path outside his cabin, his own voice calling from the darkness. "Eli, help me, I'm hurt." He never went to check. He knew what he would find: nothing, or worse than nothing. The other rangers thought he was paranoid. They joked about it. Eli and his ghost stories, they called him. But they didn't know. They hadn't been to Black Pines. They hadn't seen the faces on the walls, heard the voices in the dark, felt the weight of centuries of wearing. Eli knew, and he knew that the thing in the cave had been telling the truth when it said it was the only one. But he also knew that truth was complicated. The thing had been the only one of its kind, yes, the first, the last, the ancient evil that had started it all. But it hadn't been the only one who chose the path. The witchery way, the choice to kill, to wear, to become. That choice was still out there, waiting for the next person who was afraid enough, desperate enough, lonely enough to take it. And Eli had seen the faces. He had heard the voices. He knew what waited in the dark for those who made that choice. So he stayed vigilant. He kept white ash in his cabin, iron under his pillow, mirrors on every wall. He slept with the lights on and the radio playing, filling the silence with human voices, real voices, voices that belonged to people who still had their faces. And he waited. The call came on a Tuesday, 3 months to the day since he had left Black Pines. Ranger Carter. The voice was unfamiliar, official. This is Agent Morrison, Department of the Interior. We need to talk about your previous posting. Eli felt ice in his veins. Black Pines. Yes, there have been developments. I thought that was over. So did we. Morrison's voice was grim. Meet me at the old station, tomorrow, dusk. I can't. You can, and you will. Morrison's voice dropped. It's wearing your face, Ranger. Whatever is in those woods, it's wearing your face. The line went dead. Eli sat in his cabin, the phone still in his hand, and felt the old fear return. He had known. Somehow he had known that it wasn't over, that the wearing would continue, that the faces would keep being taken, that the voices would keep calling. He packed that night. White ash, iron, mirrors, salt, everything he had used before, everything that had worked. And he drove through the night, back to the mountains, back to the forest, back to Black Pines. The station was as he had left it, empty, waiting, the door locked with the key he had left on the desk. But the key was gone now, the door standing open, the interior lit by a fire that shouldn't have been burning. Eli approached slowly, weapon ready, heart hammering. He could feel the silence pressing against him, the old silence of the hollow, the silence that meant something was listening. Morrison, he called. No answer. He entered the station and saw. Agent Morrison was there, seated at the desk, his back to the door. But as Eli watched, the agent turned and Eli saw his own face staring back at him. Hello, Eli. His own voice, perfect, warm, utterly wrong. I've been waiting. You're not me. Aren't I? The thing wearing his face stood, moving with Eli's gait, Eli's gestures, Eli's posture. I have your memories, your fears, your loneliness. I know what you did in the cave. I know what you saw. I know what you heard. How? The wearing doesn't end when the wearer dies. The thing smiled with Eli's mouth. It echoes, it spreads. The thing in the cave, it touched you, it spoke to you, it thanked you, and in that moment it passed something on, a seed, a potential. No. Yes. The thing moved closer and Eli saw that its shadow was wrong, too many limbs, too many angles, the shadow of something that had never been human. I've been growing, Eli, learning, waiting for you to come back, because you're the one who ended it, the one who killed the first, and that makes you special, that makes you worthy. Worthy of what? Of being worn. The thing was close now, close enough to touch, and Eli could smell it, cedar and rot and something else, something that smelled like himself. The first one, it was old, ancient. It had forgotten how to wear properly. It took faces, yes, but it didn't understand them, didn't become them, it just collected them. And you. I understand. The thing reached out and Eli felt its fingers on his cheek, cold and dry and wrong. I don't just wear faces, I become them, I am them. When I wear you, I won't just have your memories. I will be you, completely, perfectly. No one will ever know the difference." "Why?" Eli asked, his voice shaking. "Why do this?" "Because I'm lonely." The thing's voice shifted, becoming something else, something younger, more vulnerable. "Because I want to be someone, anyone, everyone. And you're so alone, Eli, so isolated. No one will miss you. No one will notice. You'll just fade away. And I'll be you, better than you, more than you." Eli thought about the coastal park, the other rangers, the tourists on the beach. He thought about his cabin, his routines, his carefully constructed isolation. The thing was right. No one would miss him. No one would notice. "That's not true," he said. "Isn't it?" The thing smiled. "When was the last time someone called you? The last time someone asked how you were? The last time someone cared?" Eli couldn't answer. "See," the thing's hand moved to his throat, gentle, almost loving. "You're already gone. I'm just finishing the process." "No." Eli reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the iron nail he kept there. "You're wrong." He struck. The iron entered the thing's chest, and it screamed. Not Eli's scream, but something else, something raw and ancient and terrified. The form convulsed, the face flickering, shifting, trying to maintain the wearing. "You can't," it gasped. "Iron doesn't." "Iron doesn't work on skinwalkers," Eli said, reaching for the white ash with his other hand. "But you're not a skinwalker. You're just an echo, a reflection, and reflections can be broken." He threw the ash, and the thing screamed again, its form destabilizing, the wearing breaking apart. For a moment, Eli saw beneath the mask, saw the thing's true nature, the void that existed where a self should have been. "How?" it gasped. "How do you know?" "Because I learned." Eli grabbed the mirror from his pack, holding it up, forcing the thing to see itself. "I studied, I prepared, and I understood you're not the first. You're not even the second. You're just an echo, a copy of a copy, and copies can be destroyed." The mirror caught the firelight, reflecting the thing's true form. Not Eli, not anyone, just emptiness wearing a shape. The thing screamed, the sound like tearing metal, and collapsed. But it didn't dissolve, it didn't fade, it just stopped, became still. A shell, empty, waiting. Eli stood over it, breathing hard, and understood at last. The thing in the cave had been the source, yes, the first, the ancient, the original. But its death had sent ripples through the world, echoes of the wearing that had taken root in others, in people who had heard the stories, felt the fear, made the choice. This thing, this echo, was one of many. And there would be more. As long as people were afraid, as long as they were lonely, as long as they were desperate enough to choose the witchery way, there would be more. The war would never end. But Eli could fight it. He could hunt the echoes, destroy the copies, keep the wearing from spreading. He could be what he had become in that cave, not just a ranger but a hunter, a guardian, someone who stood between humanity and the things that would wear it. He looked down at the empty shell that had worn his face, and he made a choice. He would stay, not at Black Pines, that station was closed now, would remain closed forever, but in the mountains, in the forests, in the places where the echoes gathered, where the wearing took root, where the faces were stolen. He would hunt them, all of them, until the echoes faded, until the wearing stopped, until the last skinwalker was ash in memory. Or until he fell, whichever came first. He burned the shell in the station's fireplace, watching it curl and blacken and become nothing. Then he walked out into the night, the stars wheeling overhead, the silence pressing against him like a promise. The hollow was still there, the voices were still waiting, but now Eli was waiting too. And he was learning. Over the next year he became something else. Not a ranger anymore. He had resigned from the Forest Service, given up the security, the pension, the normal life. He became a hunter, a tracker, a killer of things that wore faces. He found others like him, survivors, mostly, people who had seen the wearing and lived. A woman in New Mexico whose sister had been taken. A man in Montana who had killed a skinwalker with white ash and prayer. a group in Utah who called themselves the Hollow Road Society, who had been fighting the Waring for generations. They taught him, he taught them. Together they built a network, a resistance, a force that could stand against the spreading darkness. And they fought. In the forests of the Pacific Northwest, where trees grew in spirals and voices called from the mist. In the deserts of Arizona, where ancient things wore the faces of tourists and travelers. In the mountains of Appalachia, where the hollows were deep and the Waring was old. They lost people, good people, brave people, faces that were taken, voices that were stolen, lives that were consumed by the Waring. But they won too. They destroyed echoes, killed skinwalkers, freed the faces that had been trapped. They learned the true names, spoke them aloud, forced the wearers to remember what they had been. And slowly, the tide began to turn. The Waring didn't stop. It would never stop, not completely. As long as humans could choose, some would choose the witchery way. Some would kill for power, wear faces for immortality, become monsters to escape their humanity. But now there were hunters. Now there was resistance. Now the Waring didn't go unchallenged, didn't spread unchecked, didn't consume everything in its path. Eli became a legend among the hunters. The ranger, they called him. The one who had faced the first, who had killed the ancient, who had started the war. He didn't feel like a legend. He felt tired, old beyond his years, haunted by faces and voices and the memory of a thing that had thanked him as it died. But he kept fighting, because someone had to, because the alternative was surrender, was the end of everything human. And then, 5 years after Black Pines, he got the message. It came on a frequency only the hunters used, encoded in a way that only they could read. A single word, repeated 3 times. Return. Eli knew. He didn't need coordinates, didn't need explanation. He knew where he had to go. Black Pines. He drove for 2 days, following roads that had grown more overgrown, more forgotten, more lost. The station was still there, still empty, still waiting, but the forest had changed. The spiral trees were back. The silence was deeper. The Cherokee markers had been renewed, fresh bones tied to fresh branches, warnings written in blood as well as symbol. And in the center of it all, the cave waited. Eli entered with white ash and iron and mirrors, prepared for anything. But what he found was not what he expected. The chamber was empty, no faces on the walls, no voices in the dark, just a single figure seated on the throne of bone and wood, waiting. It was the thing from the cave, the first, the ancient, the one he had killed. But it was different now. It had a face, its own face, human, tired, ancient beyond measure, and in its eyes something that hadn't been there before. Peace. You came, it said, and its voice was just one voice, old and weak and real. You called me. I did, the man gestured to the empty chamber. I wanted you to see, to understand. Understand what? That it's over. The man smiled, and it was a human smile, sad and sweet. The Waring, the echoes, all of it. You stopped it, Ranger, you and your hunters. You killed so many, destroyed so much that the path itself is fading. The witchery way is dying. The man stood, moving slowly, carefully, like someone who had forgotten how to use a body. The choice is still there, yes, but fewer are making it. The fear you created, the resistance, the hunting, it has changed things, made the price too high. That's good. It is. The man approached, and Eli saw that he was transparent, fading, barely holding together. I wanted to thank you before I go. Go where? Where all things go, the man laughed, weak and genuine. I held on for so long, Ranger, so many centuries. I was afraid of death, afraid of ending, afraid of being forgotten, but you showed me. The Waring wasn't life. It was just delay, just fear. I didn't show you anything. You did. The man reached out, his hand passing through Eli's shoulder, leaving a sensation like cold wind. You chose to fight, to protect, to be human even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. That reminded me of what I had given up, what I had lost. Can you be human again? No, the man shook his head. That choice was made too long ago. The path was walked too far. He smiled again. But I can choose to end, to let go, to stop being this. What happens then? Peace. The man closed his eyes, finally. He began to fade, his form becoming light, becoming memory, becoming nothing. Wait, Eli said. The others, the echoes, what happens to them? They fade too. The man's voice was distant, coming from somewhere else, somewhere beyond. Without me, without the source, they have no power. They will wear their last faces, speak their last words, and then they will be free. And the faces they've taken. Released. The man was almost gone now, just a shimmer in the air. All of them, every face, every voice, every life, I release them. I give them back. Thank you, Eli whispered. No, the man's final words echoed in the chamber, in Eli's mind, in the spaces between. Thank you, Ranger, for ending the wearing, for freeing me, for being human. Then he was gone. The chamber was empty, just stone and silence and the memory of something ancient that had finally found peace. Eli stood alone and felt the weight lift. The faces on the walls, the ones he had seen in his dreams, the ones that had haunted him, were gone. The voices in the dark, the whispers, the calls, the mimicry, were silent. The wearing was over. He walked out of the cave into the afternoon light. The spiral trees were dead, their branches drooping, their patterns fading. The Cherokee markers were falling, the bones turning to dust, the warnings becoming unnecessary. And in the clearing, waiting for him, were the others. Jess and Mark, Tom and Sarah, Kevin and Lisa, the campers from that first night, the ones who had survived, who had been freed. They stood together, whole and human and alive, their faces their own, their voices real. Ranger Carter, Jess said, and she was smiling. We wanted to thank you. You don't have to. We do. Mark stepped forward, his hand outstretched. You saved us, all of us, not just from what took us, but from being forgotten, from being lost. I just did my job. You did more than that. Tom spoke, his voice strong, recovered from the wearing. You fought, you kept fighting, even when it seemed impossible. That's what humans do, Eli said. We fight, we protect, we keep going. Yes, Sarah smiled, and it was a real smile, warm and human. That's exactly what we do. They left together, walking out of the hollow, out of the forest, out of the darkness. Behind them, Black Pines was just a forest again, just trees and silence and the natural order restored. But Eli knew that the memory would remain. The stories would be told. The warnings would be passed down, generation to generation, about the thing in the woods that wore faces, that stole voices, that became what it wore. And he knew that somewhere, in some dark place, someone would hear the story and feel the fear. And in that fear, they might find the strength to choose differently, to be human, to protect rather than consume. The wearing was over, but the vigilance would continue. Eli Carter returned to the coast, to the cliffs and the ocean and the light. He was a ranger again, protecting the wilderness, helping visitors, maintaining trails. The work was good. The work was clean. But some nights when the wind died and the ocean went still, he still heard the voices. Not the whispers of the wearing, but something else. The voices of the saved, the freed, the ones who had been trapped and released. They called to him, not in fear but in gratitude, not to lure but to thank. And Eli would smile and whisper back, "You're welcome." The hollow was silent. The forest was at peace. And Eli Carter, the ranger, the hunter, the guardian, finally slept without fear. The end of the wearing. The beginning of the memory. And the eternal vigilance of those who protect the human face. Thank you for listening to tonight's stories. If you enjoyed them, please leave a like and subscribe.